This is a prime target for the Ukrainians to hit and is having a massive impact. The message that the war is coming home is definitely coming directly home to the average Russian. For the first time in 20 years, Russia is having to import petrol and diesel so that it can keep the Russian people going. Russia can't protect its capital city. It can't protect its second city. It can't stop Ukrainian drones hitting 2,000 kilometers the other side of the Urals. Welcome to the Sun Analysis with me, Philip Ingram. Now today I'm going to talk about Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure. I'm going to briefly mention oil and gas infrastructure. We'll probably look at that in more detail at some stage later, but I'm going to concentrate a little bit more on their attacks on Wildberries, and what Wildberries is, I will explain. So let me get into this from the outset. Putin is focused on the front lines in the eastern Ukraine. That's where his main effort is, trying to capture the bits of the Donbass that he hasn't got. Zelensky's response? To hold Putin steady and to attack Putin in his rear areas. Not just the military rear areas, but the rear areas as the country. So he's attacking his oil and gas infrastructure and he's attacking Wildberries. First of all, cripple that oil and gas infrastructure, stop Russia's ability to continue to pay for this illegal conflict, and then start to bring the impact to normal Russians, but also the impact to the supply chain supplying the Russian front line, and that's where Wildberries comes in. But the oil blitz, a quick bit to set that into context, because that started before the Ukrainians went on to the Wildberries attacks. We saw in 2025 Russian oil companies suffered about 1 trillion rubles, which is about $13 billion worth of total losses with Ukrainian attacks across refineries, oil storage sites, oil export capabilities, and everything else across Russia. While physical damage topped 100 billion rubles, the real devastation came from the loss of profits and the logistic nightmares and the crippled export capacity. As we're now sitting in 2026, for the first time in 20 years, Russia is having to import petrol and diesel so that it can keep the Russian people going. In 2026, first half of 2026, the Ukrainian officials claimed another $7 billion of attacks on the Russian oil system. That's $7 billion of losses that can't be put into fighting in the front line. But as Russia scrambled to repair these complex refining units, many of which they can't get the components for because they require them to be imported, and international sanctions are stopping that from happening, Ukrainian intelligence shifted the crosshairs of their sights to a new target. This is where Wildberries comes in. Now, what is Wildberries? What are the Wildberries warehouses? You can see on the maps that we have here, I've got lots of little white dots. Those are all Wildberries warehouses. Think of Amazon. Think of the vast sites that Amazon has got with big warehouses, lots of shelves in them, lots of robots and people going in, picking the goods that you are buying online and working out how it's going to be delivered. And then the trucks that are coming in and coming out and delivering it to your home, to your businesses, or to anywhere else that you ask it to go to. Well, Wildberries is the Russian Amazon. It works in almost exactly the same way. It's got big logistic hubs all over Russia, as we can see with the white dots that we have here. And those are only representing some of them. Those logistic hubs are interconnected by a logistic network, a truck network that is running as smoothly as Amazon does, or it did, because they will do their equivalent of prime deliveries. They will be able to deliver something that has been ordered within 24, 48 hours or anything else. But it's also where you get the import and export coming from a lot of dual-use goods coming into Russia, where components for drones, electronics, military material, uniforms or webbing and packs and helmets and body armor that can be used in the front line were coming in from the likes of China in particular. And then they were being distributed out to the companies that are turning those into manufactured goods, the FPV drones that the Russians are using so successfully in the front line, and then getting them moved to the front line. But because these logistic networks, these trucks are working across the board, and because Wildberries with those dual use and its military components had a military mart on it, they're a legitimate target under international law. They're contributing directly to the operation. They're not purely civilian. They've lost any protections that you would have under the Geneva Conventions for being a purely civilian target. The Ukrainians recognize that. And there's a number of secondary issues that come off it. But that logistic network as well, those trucks, those Wildberries trucks, were moving Russian military materiel around. It was a good way of supplementing what the Russian military could do by itself in a way that it was very difficult for people to identify and to target. The Ukrainians, wasn't difficult for them. They found it and they're identifying it and targeting. So what have they been doing? And who else is going to impact? Well, we've got the military use of these Wildberries sites. The civilian use for these Wildberries sites it's the place where, like we do with Amazon, people buy their clothes or their household goods or their electronics that they want to make things good at home. They can buy virtually anything that they want. People have become dependent on it. That therefore means that if they have difficulty getting these goods, the message that the war is coming home is definitely coming directly home to the average Russian. The second thing that they do, which brings the war message home to the average Russian, is a lot of small businesses use Wildberries as their import-export control and storage hub for the goods that they're purchasing. It's like drop shipping we have in the UK. You order something online, you wonder why it takes weeks for it to come. It's because when you order it online, that order automatically goes through to the supplier from AliExpress or Temu or the likes in China, and then it has to get shipped from there the whole way through. The same thing happens with Wildberries, but it's held in stock inside the Wildberries different warehouses. Those local businesses will then have that automatically shipped out to the customer. They take the money for it, and that's how they are making their business and surviving. However, because Ukraine is attacking the sites, because the Wildberries warehouses are burning down, the stock is being lost. The chief executive of Wildberries has turned around and called it a force majeure. Why? Because that means they don't have to pay any compensation. So we've got lots of little businesses that are relying on these Wildberries logistics sites surviving, relying on the supply chain working, but they're going out of business because they're losing their stock. They've got no insurance and they can't afford to buy more. And there isn't a mechanism to get that more into Russia and get it distributed quickly. That is bringing the war home to the average Russian. There's another bit that comes in as well. Wildberries has been rapidly expanding across the whole of Russia. All of these logistic sites take money to build them. That money has come from one or two Russian domestic banks. Those banks are in it for millions and millions, in fact hundreds of millions of rubles. That's millions of dollars in what they've loaned to Wildberries. Wildberries is on a repayment scheme. It's making a lot of money, or it was making a lot of money whenever it could do its business. If it can't pay that money back and it collapses, the pressure that there is then on some of the Russian commercial banks, the sorts of banks that we see in the high streets in the UK or the United States or elsewhere, is phenomenal. The Russian central bank has stepped in to try and say that if lots of these little companies, if lots of the individuals owe lots of money, then you're not to bring penalties in, you're to give them longer to pay it back, you're to do everything else, because they see the impact that that could have on the Russian economy should Wildberries collapse and the debt then go into the Russian banks, and the banks then potentially collapse because of the debt that hits them, and therefore the impact that that would have on the overall Russian economy. So the Ukrainians have been very clever. They're hitting a military target that's got a direct effect on what's going on the front lines in the east of Ukraine. They're hitting a target that is impacting the average Russian, that they can't get the goods that they want from their prime distribution, and therefore they're suffering a little bit at home. It's impacting the Russian businesses so that from a financial perspective, there's more pressure being put on the Russian government. And it's impacting Wildberries as a business, which is directly related to something that could affect the Russian economy directly. This is a prime target for the Ukrainians to hit and is having a massive impact. Put that on top of what I said about the oil and gas infrastructure, and this is putting very, very real pressure on Vladimir Putin and his government. So how did this start? Well, it started with an opening salvo on Moscow and Tambov. Well, Tambov, the Tambov Oblast, here it is, southeast of Moscow. Moscow we have here. I'm going to bring a bigger map up so that we can look at that in a bit more detail. Okay, Moscow. We all know where it is in Russia, but I've got a bigger picture of it here. Why have I got a bigger picture of it here? It's the center of the Russian government. It's where Vladimir Putin will sit and try and control what is going on. Everything focuses around Moscow. The Muscovites, one of the largest centers of population in Russia. The other large center of population is St. Petersburg, more of which in a moment. It is one of the most heavily protected cities in the world, allegedly. We saw back in May, the May Day parades, Vladimir Putin scaled it down enormously because of the drone threat from the Ukrainians. President Zelensky gave permission for the parade to go ahead and said that he wouldn't attack Moscow. Then Donald Trump turns around and at the NATO summit is talking to President Zelensky and says, why don't we go to Moscow and have a meeting with Vladimir Putin to talk about peace? And President Zelensky turns around and says, it would be rather dangerous for me to go to Moscow because there are too many Ukrainian drones flying around. And he's right. And what are those Ukrainian drones doing? They're attacking the Wildberries sites that we see circling around the outsides of Moscow, all indicated by the red dots that we've got here. Why is that significant? It's significant in a number of ways. First thing is, Moscow has got one of the heaviest air defense capabilities in the world based around it. If Ukraine can fly its drones, not just into the southern parts of Moscow to hit the Wildberries sites that are there, but across Moscow to hit in the north, or around Moscow to get elsewhere, it's showing to Vladimir Putin, it's showing to the head of his air forces, it's showing to his military, but it's more importantly showing to the people of Moscow that the air defense system does not work. The Russian government, the Russian military cannot protect them. It can't protect the Wildberries, it can't protect the businesses, it can't protect the individuals. If they can't do that in Moscow, where else can they do it? And the other message that comes from this is internationally, because we're looking at some of those that are supporting Russia. For example, the Chinese. They're saying that the Russians, no matter what they claim about their military capability, can't protect Moscow. And therefore the Chinese are very reluctant at coming in and investing in Russia itself. We saw that a couple of weeks ago whenever Vladimir Putin went with a very strong diplomatic entourage into Beijing to meet Xi Jinping, the Premier of China. Why did he go there? Why did he bring a very strong delegation? Well, it was to get a Trans-Siberian 2 gas pipeline built by the Chinese to get Russian gas into China so that Putin could sell Russian gas to China. Because Putin knows he can't afford to build the pipeline himself. Did Xi Jinping agree to build it? No. Why did he not agree to build it? Because he knew that the Russians couldn't keep it safe. Because he sees the Ukrainians making sure that the world understands that Putin can't keep Moscow safe. And if we can hit there, then we could hit anywhere else. The other city I want to look at is St. Petersburg, and I'll touch on that in a moment. So why do I bring out St. Petersburg? It's off this map here, but St. Petersburg is important in a number of different ways. It is effectively the second city to Moscow. It is the area which has not been touched really by the conflict in Ukraine until fairly recently. The Muscovites and the St. Petersburg residents saw the war in Ukraine as something happening elsewhere. It wasn't really affecting them. Well, earlier on this year, Ukraine decided to show the St. Petersburg residents something completely different. The Russians had an annual trade conference in St. Petersburg where they brought international delegations in to talk about trade with Russia and everything else. It rivals some of the others that go around the world. It was well known. As the delegates were walking into the conference halls to sit and discuss trade with Russia, Ukrainian drones flew across and hit military targets for the Russian Black Sea Fleet the Russian Baltic Sea Fleet on the edge of the Baltic. The message that that sent was that the Russians couldn't protect international business anywhere inside Russia. And why is St. Petersburg also psychologically important? Well, it's psychologically important to Vladimir Putin. He was born there. His political development came in St. Petersburg, and therefore, he sees that as home. He sees that as somewhere that is close to his heart, as he does with Crimea, because he held his honeymoon there. Right, the people of St. Petersburg and the people of Moscow are the ones that Vladimir Putin wants to keep on side. If he sees any dissent that's coming in there and that dissent starts to grow, there's no evidence of that or indications of that at the moment. But if that comes, he knows that that is something that he will have great difficulty in trying to stop. And that's why Putin has put an awful lot of effort into trying to protect them from what is going on. He's failed. He's failed because fuel prices have gone through the roof if they can get it. They now can't get access to the goods from Wildberries, and a lot of businesses are failing. And of course, this logistic network that supplies all the people that are here is also part of the logistic network that is bringing food and other normal goods into shops and supermarkets. And prices are going through the roof. And this is impacting the day-to-day life of individuals. What's Putin's response to that? He's cut the internet off. He's cut the internet off in Moscow to many people. That is not the sign of someone who's confident as to what's going on. Oh, and of course, if you cut the internet off, then people can't order from Wildberries. But then there are no Wildberries, or there are very few Wildberries logistic sites left to order from. So how has this happened? How has this happened as it's developed? Let me just run through it very quickly with you. As I said, it started off in July 26 with a massive strike in Moscow, 48 hours hitting the Wildberries sites around there. I've talked those in detail. Then St. Petersburg. I've talked the details of St. Petersburg as it happened. But then, more importantly, we got into the deep strikes, and the deep strikes further south and further east. And we get up into Yekaterinburg here, 2,000 kilometers from the Ukrainian border. We've got Ukrainian border here. We've had Ukrainian drones have to get through Russian air defense capabilities the whole way through to hit a site there. If we look at the air defenses that there, the military planning that's needed to do that, the intelligence that's needed to get through everything else that's in there, that is phenomenal. We've had Moscow hit. We've had St. Petersburg hit. We've had lots of sites in between hit, but Russia can't protect its capital city. It can't protect its second city. It can't stop Ukrainian drones hitting 2,000 kilometers the other side of the Urals to attack the Wildberries sites. What can it protect? It's emboldening the Ukrainians. It's worrying the Russians. It's causing the eyebrows of Xi Jinping and other international supporters to be raised and go, maybe this isn't the place to invest in, and it's causing Vladimir Putin a massive headache. I do understand that the head of his air forces, his air defense, was removed from post and decided to take up a window cleaning job recently and fell out of the 9th floor window of a high-rise building. That is a message to those that are in the air defense that Putin is not happy that the Ukrainians are managing to do this. So the campaign spread out there and also then went down into Crimea as well, because of course where the Russians occupy parts of Ukraine, and they've occupied Crimea since 2014, we have to remember that. And Vladimir Putin has had the Russian Duma change its constitution to incorporate Crimea and some of the disputed Donbass regions of Ukraine into the Russian constitution, where he's then told the Russian people that they are part of Russia, when they're not. They've been illegally annexed. And the Ukrainians are making that quite clear. The war is coming home. So because Wildberries operates across the whole of Russia, what are the losses estimated at? Well, 100 to 200 billion rubles. The seller's inventory, those are those little companies that have got their inventories being stored by Wildberries and all the rest of it, 215 to 280 billion rubles. Combine that together and we're talking of somewhere between $2 billion US and $6 billion US. Not all the Wildberries logistic sites have been hit yet. The Ukrainians seem to be hitting 2 or 3 every couple of days and burning them down and destroying them. And Ukraine's strategy is evolving. Oil and gas infrastructure, the financial impact that that's having. Wildberries, the financial impact that that's having and the financial impact that could come from that. But both are bringing the war home to the average Russian. They're having that military impact, oil and gas, impacting flow of oil and gas to support Russian operations in the east of Ukraine. But Wildberries, that logistic support, the troops on the ground can't get their body armour, their helmets, the things that they were using. The commanders on the ground who've got a degree of autonomy. There aren't central stores and depots in the same way that we have with the British military or in the US military or anything else, and quartermasters to get stuff out. Stuff is bought. Wildberries delivered it. Not anymore. And then the impact that that's having on the civilian population, and them recognising that the government can't protect them anymore. They can't protect their businesses, and the cost of living is going through the roof. This is where Ukraine is playing a longer term game. It's recognising that in the east here, all it can do is hold the Russians because they're much stronger militarily as the Russians try and attack in. And it's doing that very successfully. It's not going to be able to generate enough combat power to push the Russians back at a tactical level. So it's attacking at this operational level. It's attacking Russia's very core ability to continue to support the operations that are going on the front line, undermine Vladimir Putin from a political perspective, undermine Russia from an economic perspective internally. And that is having a strategic impact. We've seen Xi Jinping step back from some of the support he's giving. He'll happily sell stuff to Russia, but if Russia can't pay, he's going to get that payback some other way. We have to see where that comes in the future. And of course, with Wildberries, there are its competitors as well. Ozone could potentially be the next target. The Ukrainians have attacked one of their warehouses so far. Let's see what happens there. We'll look at that at a later date. But anyway, that's all we have from our special analysis today. If you like what you've seen, please tell your friends about it. Put some comments in and we can get those addressed at some stage in the future. But subscribe to our channel. And once again, thank you for watching. Goodbye.